Lincoln came here to Center Hill basically to talk to the commanding officer of the garrison of Petersburg to see whether the community was getting used to the idea that the Confederacy was over and slavery was done with.
Once he found out that Petersburg had fallen, he decided he wanted to come in and see the city for himself. And General Grant allowed him to use his horse Cincinnati. They eventually arrived to this house at the corner of Market and Brown Street.
Behind me is the Appomattox River. We're about 65 feet above the river on Point of Rocks. Lincoln here would have been able to see the spires of Petersburg, and he would have been able to view in both directions and see his 10th Corps troops across the river at Broadway Landing.
Came down from Washington on a visit at Grant's invitation. Lincoln would spend 2 of the last 3 weeks of his life here.
Elizabeth was born in February of 1818 in Dinwiddie, Virginia. Elizabeth Keckley is a free person, was in Washington, D.C. in the spring of 1861 trying to find more employment. The woman that was already a client said that she would introduce Elizabeth Keckley to Mary Lincoln, and Mrs. Lincoln hired Keckley as her personal dressmaker.
From June 1864 until the end of the war in April 1865, General Grant supplied the Army of the Potomac and the Army of the James from this location. We're right on the James River.
I think Lincoln came to Petersburg because the war was very personal to him.
This is where Grant would conduct the war from. Keep in mind that Grant is in command of all Union armies across the United States. Lee is in charge of one Confederate army. So Grant is really coordinating all the various Union armies across the country from this cabin right here. So this is what you might call the Pentagon of the Union Army during the Civil War.
So Lincoln knew this was the site of that battle and knew that Fort Mahone was the focus of it, and got off his horse and climbed up on the parapets of Fort Mahone. All around him were dead bodies. He stood up on the parapet, and 2 of the soldiers say he was crying, weeping as he always did because of the dead, but also weeping because this war was over, and he knew it. This was the first moment that he had totally tangible evidence. He was passing through the fortifications of Petersburg, and the Confederates were gone. He knew that meant this war was over. He knew that meant that slavery was done for. He knew that meant the Union had been preserved.